Welcome to our spidergramming exercise that you'll be doing this week. This is a tool to help you assess what kinds of activities you need to support for your NGO client, how to prioritize which are most important, and then how to match technology to them. So it's a tool that you can use from the beginning right till the end of your project, because you can also use it to review and reflect on your work. The work I'm sharing with you comes from the work that I did with Etienne Wenger and John Smith for a book called Digital Habitats, Stewarding Technology for Communities, where we were looking at how communities of practice use technologies to learn and be together. Now, communities of practice are groups of people who care about something and learn together about that and apply that learning over time. What we noticed was that with the rise of internet-based tools, technology, combined with the social interactions of how people worked, designed, learned, played, got to know each other together, there was a fundamental change. So this combination of technology and social has fundamentally changed what it means to be and how we can be together. And we wanted to understand this better. So we came up with this idea of the spidergram. I think it's important to say that we're not talking about the spider per se, but about the web. Spidergrams are tools that have been used for years to show the relationship between different things and the importance of those things. You can also look to some of the traditional Native American work where they talk about all the directions, and so these have deep cultural meanings. Here we're using the spidergram as a way to assess technology. In our research with communities of practice, we were originally thinking that, like IT departments and sort of CIOs, Chief Information Officers, were the people we'd go to understand how communities use technology. But what we discovered was the most fruitful and useful use of technology was initiated and stewarded by people from within the community. So we began to think of these people as community technology stewards. Often they were volunteers, or they sort of accidentally fell into the role. I know that I've often accidentally been a technology steward for my communities. The definition we came up with is this: technology stewards are people with enough experience of the workings of a community to understand its technology needs, and enough experience with technology to take leadership in addressing those needs. So in other words, this is not about the geekiest person in the room, though it may be sometimes, but it has to be someone who understands both the dynamics of human interaction and technology. Because when you're dealing with that interface of communities and technologies, not everyone is usually a geek. And so you have to consider the technology in a particular context. We also noticed that stewardship typically included selecting and configuring technology, so getting the listserv set up or finding out what's required to set up a crowdsourcing site, as well as supporting its use in the practice and its practice in the community. So, let's say you discovered a great new way to set up a group on Facebook. You want others to know about this. So this idea of stewarding the practice, not just the technology, is incredibly important. And one of the things we notice is some people are better at the tech side and some people are better at the practice side. So often technology stewardship is a shared practice. What technology stewardship is not is calling the IT department. And I think this is something, when you work with your NGOs, may be a new concept. It may be separated in their organization that all technology goes through the IT department, or it may be a small NGO that has no IT department and they feel some fear or discomfort with technology. So again, you're the bridge here, not the help desk per se. So let's move on and look at the spidergram. In our research for digital habitats, we analyzed the activities of many communities of practice, and we found they grouped into 9 main areas. I'm going to briefly explain each of these areas, and you may find these labels relate to or don't necessarily relate to your context. So don't worry so much about the labels, but think about the different types of things that happened in here. Now, the first thing, and the most important in many communities, are this idea of open-ended conversations and meetings. So this is on the top and the upper left. Open-ended conversations would be ongoing conversations in a Facebook group or an email list, or when people crossed each other in the hall of their building. Topics would change over time, then who was participating may change over time. So they have this kind of informal, loose feeling. The more structured conversations would happen in meetings, which have a beginning, a middle, and end, may have an agenda. Usually it's a set time and a set group of people. So it adds more structure, and typically people in meetings want to get something particular done or something to happen. A little more in depth than meetings come to the right, which is projects, where we have a set of interdependent tasks, a certain number of people with roles, and on open-ended conversations there's probably not formalized roles. In projects there are. And an end goal, so we know by the end of November we want to create a video for our NGOs. So you're doing a lot of project work as your internal team, but what you may be doing with your client may be slightly different. So if you go further to the right at around 3 o'clock on the clock, you have access to expertise. So when you talk to your NGO client, you're going to get their expertise about their NGO. You may talk to other people about expertise about the NGO's needs. So if you're going for crowdfunding, you might contact a couple of other groups that have done crowdfunding and find out what they learned, what they suggest you do or don't do. If you flip to the opposite of expertise, you have content. Now, this is something that has really changed when we have these new internet-based tools. And new, I mean starting in the late 1990s, so not so new, but they're always evolving. So it used to be people would get content created by experts. Now people create their own content. So these sort of activities are finding and sharing content, rating content, but also creating content and rating and sharing that content. There is a multiple directional flow of content. It is no longer just thought of as a library or repository. And that's a particularly important shift. And some NGOs have figured this out and are using that productively, and some are still kind of in that old school of we're pushing our expertise out to the world. And that can be a challenge. The 4 orientations or activity orientations on the bottom part go to the experiences of the members as they do the stuff on the upper half. So on the right is relationships. So tools that help us have time to get to know each other, to post profiles, to have member directories, to find who knows what or who is in what part of the world would be important in relationship. Next to that going down is context, and this is an odder one and a little harder to wrap your head around. Is if a community is very externally oriented, which would be pointing towards the outside of the circle in this external orientation, they are open, transparent, they want to invite in other participation and share what they know. If they're very internally oriented, it would be further towards the middle. So this is the one piece on the spidergram that isn't about importance, but it's about directionality. If you're very internally oriented, you want a private platform. You don't want anyone else to come in. You want to keep what goes on in the community private. So let's say a community of people recovering from spousal abuse don't want their spouse to know where they are. So the privacy is important. Or political people doing political activism where it may be what they're doing is illegal in their country and they need to protect themselves. And technology can help do that. And then the final 2 on the lower left are individual participation versus community cultivation. And I say versus, but it's not really either or, but sometimes it shows up that way. So community cultivation is you want people to have a shared experience. You want everyone to experience the activities similarly. That means maybe the interface similarly. You want people to do things sort of around the same time. Where with individual participation, you're really looking to allow people flexibility to decide what they want to do, how they want to do it, and when they want to do it. And these would imply different technological selections. Now we move through those orientations fairly quickly. So in the handout you can see there's a little bit more explanation here for you should you want to use it. I thought it would be helpful to look at a couple of examples of spidergrams. This is one that I extrapolated from a book called Red Tails in Love, Pale Male's Story, which is about the bird watchers in the Central Park of New York City. And they're a very interesting, long-lived community of people who go out and watch the birds in the park, but they also take care of the park, notice if something's wrong, respond to emergencies with birds. And so they're a very diverse community, and the meetings is really their most important activity because people get together for weekly bird walks or daily bird walks or feeding, filling up bird feeders. There may be irregular celebrations and larger events, but that's the daily happening. There isn't really any open-ended conversation that happens with everybody, but people bump into each other and have an informal conversation. They sometimes have projects. They certainly are interested in relationships, but you can see it as a large and diverse community. There are many different things they do, and the way they do them is different. I just want to talk about technology. In this case, the register over in content is a book that was stored in a coffee shop where people would note what they saw. And this turns out to be very valuable and very fragile, because if something happened to that book, they'd lose all their information. I don't know what they're doing now, but that's a very simple technology. The second community is a community that I'm very involved in and have been in the past. I'm a community leader in a community technology stewardship called Knowledge Management for Development, or kmfordev.org. Some of you may find, if you really get into this working on Millennium Development Goals, you may be interested in joining the community. The real central part of KM4Dev is the open-ended conversations there on the upper left. It's email-based because there are people in poor areas of poor connectivity or who travel a lot, so we can't rely solely on live bandwidth heavy web-based experiences, though we have other tools that are web-based. And we have these ongoing conversations that are basically a series of question and answers. Every couple of years, a very small subset of the community, like 10%, can get together for face-to-face, but most people can't afford to do that. So it's really important for some people, but not important for everyone. We're not so good at projects, but we do access expertise, and we're very externally facing in our context because we want to share, because we see this as a good for the world. You can use a spidergram to layer different things, like comparing two communities as you see here, or you can compare where you are now, baseline, where you want to be. You can look at it from the retrospectively and say where we are now and look back where we came from. So it's a flexible tool that you might find useful in other contexts. What we want to use it for your projects is assessing what activities you need to support, because you never want to pick your technologies until you figure out what it is you need to support with those technologies, prioritizing those activities, and then matching them to technology. In this slide, which is an old slide, and I left it in here on purpose, it gives some examples of different kinds of technologies that support the various orientations that we identified as important for communities of practice. You will notice that some of those technologies are still very current, but you don't see a lot of Facebook there. And when we did this, Facebook wasn't the giant, enormous thing it is now. And technologies will change over time. So as you work with your communities, you might find out what they're using now as part of your assessment, because sometimes introducing too many new technologies at once can be difficult. Again, you can go back and read this later in your hand. To start your spidergram, you first want to decide what activities you're supporting. So this means you've had a conversation with your NGO, or you're making some educated guesses about what kinds of activities you want to support. You may find that the labels I supplied initially from the digital habitats aren't necessarily relevant to your project, so you may need to change these, and that's perfectly okay. Add them in. Here I've laid in some changes for the activities. So I added customer support and marketing at the bottom, because these were things that are part of the work we're doing with our NGOs. You may find something different. Again, think about it. But when we talk about your spidergram, I'd like you to be able to tell me why you put the labels in that you did choose for the activities. Now, as you build your spidergram, you're going to want to put this picture up on a whiteboard and work on it together. You might want to do it electronically. I can supply you with a Excel spreadsheet, and you can create it in Excel, or you can draw it and take a picture of it. But the point is, I want you to capture the image of your spidergram so that you can share it with your tutors, that we can talk about it together. If you'd like to make an appointment for a Google Hangout, we can talk through it. What I find is, when I do a spidergram and then talk about it with someone else, I see new things that I didn't see when I tried to do it by myself. So consider this a sense-making tool, not a final product tool. Though later on you may find it a useful final product when you share it with your client. You may use it as a basis for a conversation with them. It may even show up in your final presentation in its final form. But right now it's a thinking tool, okay? So you're going to start by filling in the activities and then prioritizing. So if projects are most important, your dot would be up near the 5. If it's less important, it would be, closer to the middle. And then you'll start connecting those things so you can see the overall pattern. You may want to do this on a whiteboard so you can erase and change, or you might, each member of your team might want to do it once you've set the activities and then compare, because you may have different opinions. And that will be part of how you figure things out as a team. How do you deal with different opinions? How do you share those different opinions or perspectives with your client? Different opinions can be very valuable, but they can also be challenging for teamwork, so keep that in mind. As you work on your Spidergram, don't forget, focus on what activities best support your community or your client's purpose. Do not try and do everything. Seriously, this is the best advice I can give you. You're also going to want to figure out where your client, your community, your group team is now in terms of design, facilitation, and technology stewardship. Because if you're with a very beginner group, you want to keep it simple. And you want to focus on one or two activities that really are important. If they're very sophisticated, you could do other things. But you need to think about the engagement you want to create, not just the technology. So you may have to start where people are now. And don't try and take them too far too fast. In other cases, you're ready to, get in the rocket ship and go. As you, as a team, understand where you want to go with your Spidergram as a planning tool. This is a good chance to reflect, as mentioned before. And you can look backwards and forwards as you do this. A couple more things to consider. There is rarely just one tool that could serve a particular activity orientation, so make sure you look broadly. Don't get stuck on one thing too soon. When you think about that community orientation, togetherness in that community does not imply only everybody does everything all the time, but people splitting apart and doing things independently, but then coming back together and sharing what they're doing. And this applies to your team, and it could very well apply to your client project as well. People start where they're comfortable, and then they can move to where their needs are met, but don't push them too far out of their comfort zone. And also, when you change technology, it may change the social interaction. Remember that comment at the beginning of this conversation? Technology and social together have changed what it means to be together, and they interact with each other. Well, that's it. I look forward to seeing your Spidergrams, having conversations with you about your Spidergrams. If you'd like to set up your team to set up a meeting with me independently, it's your responsibility to reach out to me and we'll figure out how to make it work. Remember, I'm 9 hours behind you here on the west coast of the US. On this slide is a link to the Digital Habitats book site if you want more. There are free things you can download if you're interested, and there's all my contact information as usual. And have fun.